Let me see your Sk8Face! 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 Hey everyone, this is Nate from Geezer Skate, and in this episode, I'm talking about Sk8Face. No, it's not the face you make when you're skating, it's the face you see on your skateboard deck. The graphic, the main attraction of buying a new skateboard, right? This is all about the new documentary called Sk8Face, which was released this year in 2024, in case you're watching from the future, and is now, as of the time of this recording, streaming on Amazon Prime. This documentary starts off with a great brief history and overview of the evolution of skateboarding, starting off way back when in the 50s with the old scooters, the milk crate scooters, then how it went into the 60s, became a huge fad, then crashed and died out, and then in the 70s took off again and became the sport really that we know today. Activity, whatever you want to call it. So really starting in the 1970s, skateboarding in the early 70s, skateboards only really had the name of the company, if anything, on the bottom of the board. And they're like, manufacturers rightly, we're like, what do we need to put stuff on the bottom of the board? Because no one sees anything on the bottom of the board. Everything, they would put graphics on the top because you could see the top of the board. And that is until grip tape came along. Of course, then everything got covered up. So thanks to the advent of the ollie and lip tricks coming up over coping and things like that started happening in the mid 70s, you could see the bottom of the board. And with photos appearing on magazine covers and things, people started to realize, you could put something on the bottom of there and, advertise the brand of the board. So logos for the skate companies started popping up on the bottoms of board. Nothing too flashy, oftentimes they were just block lettering done in, maybe white or black color. But then we started getting graphics, and really with the rise of punk music, which was really cool, and that was one of the things I really liked learning about from this documentary is, from Steve Olson and Dwayne Peters, with the rise of the Sex Pistols, the Damned, the Ramones, all that stuff, that whole aesthetic carried over to skateboarding, and especially with those guys, they really carried that punk aesthetic to the look and the graphics of their boards, and that's why you see the checkerboard patterns, the red and black stripes, that kind of thing. It really looked like, a flyer that you'd see for a punk show, and that was a really cool revelation from this documentary. This documentary does a really good job of covering the major artists, especially from the early days, Wes Humpstead with Dogtown, V.C. Johnson with Powell Peralta, moving on into, some of the more controversial artists of the 80s and 90s, Sean Cliver and Mark McKee. And then, moving on up, well, they didn't really cover that much about, the modern era of skateboarding. It was really focused more, I feel like, on, the 80s especially, and briefly on into the 90s. But after that, it really didn't feel like, they were covering as much, past the mid 90s, which I thought was kind of a bummer, because there's so many rich graphics out there that I think are worthy of, notice and, really talking about. And so one thing, when you're watching this documentary, you may be wondering, why I'm talking about this documentary, but I've got these 3 books displayed here in front of me. Well, I couldn't help but think of especially these 2 books right here, the Disposable, the Skateboard Bible, and then Disposable, A History of Skateboard Art, both by Sean Cliver. These 2 books here are amazing. If you are really into the art of skateboards, the graphics and things, you really got to check out these 2 books right here. These books here are a great overview and really comprehensive look at the history of graphics, interviews with artists, interviews with the writers, kind of really getting into the mindset of why they came up with certain graphics and what they meant to the artist, to the writer, and their historical significance. Because a lot of these have become very recognizable and works of art that, normies, anybody, no one who has any knowledge of skateboarding instantly recognizes, which is really cool. And then this third book here, Agents Provocateur, is 100 subversive skateboard graphics, and most of these I probably can't really show here on YouTube, but this is a really interesting book if you want to see the more, shall we say, edgy side of skateboarding graphics. So this documentary, goes through, and we, really get some good interviews with, like, V.C. Johnson, with Sean Cliver, Mark McKee, and, some of those guys there. Lance Mountain, which was really cool, because, he did a lot of his own graphics for Powell Peralta. In fact, he was one of the originators of the skateboarder as artist. And so, he did his own graphics for his board. And then, well, I guess he wasn't really the first. It may have been Neil Blender. And so that was really cool to see, the progression of skateboarder as artist, and, how they went about, designing their own graphics, and, then, it gives them a greater stake in, their board and everything like that, as well as, sets them up for, greater freedom in terms of what they get to have on their board. And so it was really cool, hearing about Neil Blender, Lance Mountain, then Ed Templeton, and the list goes on and on for, skaters who did their own graphics, and just the freedom that, because I think it was Neil Blender, the first one who did it, or the first big one to do it. And, just how, it spread from there. But the documentary really kind of focused on, three main companies, especially in the 80s. It was, Powell Peralta, Santa Cruz, and Vision. And, really showing, their dominance in the marketplace at that time, and kind of the style that their graphics had, where like the Powell Peralta was like the sword and skulls and the things like that, dragons, and kind of that almost like sci-fi fantasy stuff. Santa Cruz was more like comic book, like the slasher and the Rob Roscoff face, and things like that. It felt more like the covers of, or comic book characters, fantastical, especially underground comics, that you might find like from Robert Crumb or things like that. Vision was more of like the day-glow pop side of the 80s, really bright, vibrant neon colors, a lot of shapes and things like that really personified that whole 1980s feel. Big omission though was, I really feel like, Zorlac. In terms of 80s graphics, man, it doesn't get much more gnarly and awesome than the graphics that Pushead was designing for Zorlac at the time. They just briefly showed some Zorlac decks when they were talking about money bumps, and how the shape of skateboarding changed, especially throughout the 80s, and manufacturers were adding these extra bumps in that were supposedly notches and things like that onto their decks that supposedly made a skateboard more rideable, or more amenable to certain tricks and things like that. And so whether or not that's true or not, who knows, but that was the only brief thing about Zorlac in there. So I feel like that was a huge oversight in the part of this documentary. It was under 2 hours long, so it's not that long. Does a really good job though of covering an overview of graphics, and the important graphics that there were, how they, the boom and bust periods of skateboarding, and kind of where things have gone to, but not really showing what there is today with the graphic side of things. And so if I had to rate this, I would say I would give this a 7 out of 10. I think this is a really strong start, and what I'd really love to see is maybe a mini series, like where each episode is either devoted to a certain artist or a certain brand or a certain style. So one episode could be devoted to like the whole surf skate aesthetic, like vision could, was part of that, but then you had like, TNC surf designs, which was again not shown. Those, there weren't even, unless I missed, I didn't even see a single one of the TNC decks in there. And that was, a huge part of the 80s skate culture there. Well, I guess in my mind, I feel like if you want to typify 80s skate surf culture there, you got to have some TNC in there somewhere. So, I feel like, an episode devoted to that would be awesome. An episode devoted to controversial skate graphics, an episode devoted to Zorlac and the work of Pusshead, an episode devoted to, what was happening, in the 2000s, when, the rise of like, Evan Hickox, I'm probably saying that last name wrong, but, his graphic design sensibilities. I mean, he made some killer skate graphics there, and I think that should be, we should talk about those. And really, there's so many more that haven't, didn't even have a say. Let's talk about, like the use of photography in on the bottom of decks, especially in the early 90s when the whole slick bottom decks became popular. The rise of using both appropriated photographs and then also using original photographs on there. So I think that could be a great episode. I think there's a lot of really good ideas that could be expanded upon, moving past this the documentary into something longer and into something that really is more comprehensive. Because these decks, these are works of art. Crazy how much some of them are going for now. I mean, they're highly collectible. I know so many people now use them as wall art. I have them in my office space, and I know that there's museums dedicated to them. We have, unfortunately, it's closed down now, but the dearly departed Texas Skateboard Museum had an incredible collection of decks that were hung up for people to see for a very low price. I know there are museums throughout the country and throughout the world that have incredible collections of skateboards, as well as individual collectors who have way more than I do. Be sure to tell my wife that I don't have that many in compared to some people. I've really enjoyed this. As a lover of art, all things art, whether it's painting, photography, sculpture, film, whatever. I'm a huge fan of visual art. Graphics on skateboarding, skateboards, that's always been something that's drawn me in. I love them, and it's so crazy because, like as someone said in the documentary, these are made to be destroyed. By doing rail tricks, by doing, just them breaking over time, wearing out, washing out in the sun, things like that, they're made to get ruined, and yet they're amazing art. And so I think it should be celebrated by everybody that, appreciates art. Thanks for watching this review of the Sk8Face documentary. Would love to know your thoughts of it down in the comments below, as well as your favorite skate graphic. Please be sure to also like, comment, subscribe if you're not subscribed already, and then check out one of these other videos. Till next time, keep skating, stop aging.